So, hello, welcome to the second episode of this podcast, and I'm here today with Kaspars Groševs, who is an artist, a gallery director, and well, maybe if there's anything more, you can say yourself a short introduction.
Hi. Well, sometimes they also say that I'm a curator, and well, I sort of do everything for some reason. Director of gallery, it's actually the gallery's name is 47, and it's an artist-run space, and maybe there's some confusion with the name gallery, but we are not commercial, so in a way it's artist-run space, but with the name gallery.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think anything that starts with artist run, anything that follows is very vague and always kind of messy. So maybe then a little bit about how you started your career in art, what drew you to it, and maybe specifically why contemporary and why not something more classical?
Well, probably the most classic story. I really like drawing and doing things since early age, and in my teenage years I started to experiment with music, first with tapes, then my friends got PC, and so actually music was this first impulse that started to really interest me in just creative work without really knowing what to do with it or how to earn money with it. And then during high school I met a friend, Evita Vasiljeva, who is also an artist, and she's a really great artist. And I met her accidentally, and she told me about this art school, Jānis Rosenthal's art school, that I thought was a perfect place. And then from there on I kind of got in the system. From there on I went to academy, but of course many of my classmates in art high school or later on in art academy, not all of them have pursued their careers as artists. Oftentimes it's something completely different. So for me, I think it was kind of probably some kind of inner motivation to just search for, I don't know, in the beginning it was just search for answers on how to make a good artwork, and later on it became questions about like what are the different players of the art world. And I was encouraged by several Latvian artists like Miks Mitrevits and Kristīna Kursiša, who really encouraged to when you're traveling to go to the small galleries, to the small spaces instead of the big museums that at some point you already know by heart. So I started to get really interested in these small spaces and the things that they were doing, and in lesser known galleries also kind of who were working more in commercial context but still did something that was unique and interesting for me. And so somehow I kind of I had this urge that I want to be an artist, but I was also for really long time just searching the direction that I want to take. And I think only at the very last year of my master's in Art Academy of Latvia, I finally kind of almost figured out what artwork is and what kind of artwork I want to make.
So then a little bit about that. You would classify yourself as a contemporary artist.
Yeah.
Right, I think. And also with a lot of your hobbies or sort of different things you do, also very multimediatic. So how would you describe your art, and what are the main forms, painting or more conceptual pieces?
Well, for a long time I was kind of doing my music and my art as a separate things. And then gradually I started to introduce sound in my visual art. So and now actually at this point I feel that all of it is just part of my practice. That's making sound or music or making really different mediums or writing about art or just about anything. But I think the kind of contemporary art of course is the thing that I do, but I'm not a big fan of the term contemporary art. It's okay, it sort of describes what it is, but then again it's so very broad and so very loose, and it's actually probably any art created right now is contemporary art in a way, because it's created in these contemporary times.
Mm-hmm.
But of course there are some that follow certain traditions, and of course that's what you get if you study art in Latvia. You get this heavy kind of emphasis on artistic traditions that are more connected to Latvian Impressionism or version of it, and sort of this late 19th century, early 20th century thing. And first when I got into academy, I got into a visual communication department, which is probably still the most free department, where you can actually, if you go to painting department, you will most likely paint. But in visual communication, you can paint, you can make video, you can make sound piece, you can make typeface even as your graduation work. And so this kind of freedom also allowed me to again explore really different mediums, also some digital mediums that I actually used for a while, but then it was also the professors at this department. They were artists themselves who were kind of important artists, say in 80s or 90s or early 2000s. So they offered their different worldviews, but I kind of quickly understood that, or actually not quickly, but gradually I understood that it's maybe not really my thing, and I was trying to figure out what that thing is that is my thing. So I think actually in that retrospect, probably the Lithuanian connection helped me more to realize what I want to do with art, because fairly quickly in my last years at academy, at different occasions I got introduced to different very interesting young Lithuanian artists, and that's when I realized that there are, also different ways how to talk about art, or maybe not actually talk about art, but rather just propose questions, or maybe not even questions, or just propose something that is visual. And well, I see a lot of, personally, maybe Lithuanians disagree, but I see there's a lot of influence of Fluxus movement in Lithuanian art, even though of course it was behind the Iron Curtain. But so I think this kind of approach, that the artwork is maybe more playful and there isn't a specific formula on how you make it, like it's not a one-liner joke, that I felt was more Latvian contemporary arts approach, at least in early 2000s. And yeah, there were also of course some Latvian artists that also kind of I mentioned Mix and Christina, and they were really also exploring kind of new ways of working with art and showing it, and just So I think what I got interested in was this openness to interpretations, that the artwork it can be mixture of different techniques, but somehow the medium used already says something about the work. Like if it's a video, then it already proposes question, why is it a video? Or if it's a ready-made, then it comes with all the ready-made context. And so yeah, my kind of early years that I still recognize as my own work, because of course a lot of really old work I have shunned from everywhere and it's not available in any form. But my first kind of proper solo show was in 2011 at KIM, Contemporary Art Center, that opened 2 years before. And yeah, that was the show that I think kind of showed this my interest in this more abstract, post-conceptual, but also not necessarily art scene that was kind of, I saw it as a international movement.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, my first show visually is very poor. There's nothing. There is like a tape player on the wall, some scribblings. I made a Tumblr link on like as a print on a wall, and then the print, if you type this long ass Tumblr link, you would go to a photography that showed the other side of that wall, and on the other side of the wall there was a magnet. So
it's
actually
the intersection of art and technology.
Yeah, I was there. Well, that was around the time when like post-internet art kind of started to appear also on Tumblr. So I was probably also inspired by that. But yeah, and then it had the magnet, and you could see the image if you typed in this link. But then also this whole link, it was magnetic. So like if you would put your keys against it, they would stick there.
Mm-hmm.
It was like strong magnet. And but nobody knew about it because I didn't really tell about it. I just wrote that part of this work is a magnet, but I didn't explain what it do. So that's how I started to get interested in really kind of these confusing, let's call them concepts, but also sometimes they're just very ridiculous in a way. And so that was kind of my early practice, and yeah, and that's how my interest grew in these like different forms of communicating your art, and also that probably sparked also an interest in or like a probability of opening an art space, because I started to get really interested also in how you present it, or how you just like make Facebook event or send out emails, or what's in the exhibition itself, how what info there is, and also with like different praxis that over the time have showed at 427 also probably show some of my interests in what I kind of find interesting in contemporary art.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you talk about your education, and obviously there's a lot of it is understanding older and more traditional art, where you have sort of concrete techniques that you can analyze. But when looking at contemporary art, especially for someone with no education, it really feels like chaotic and do whatever. And how much this sort of formal education do you think is necessary, and how much actual, I guess, theory or something to analyze about contemporary art there is? Can you sort of, in the future teach about contemporary art now as having some sort of specific themes or currents? So how would you even describe it?
Well, I mean, the art education at Latvian Art Academy was somehow, and probably still is, it's not really that connected to theory, and in particular departments it's heavily based on techniques. So looking at the recent graduates, and maybe even not so recent graduates, you can see that there is this kind of lack of broader contextual information, maybe some theory basics, or just, what are different people, what are different ways how different people talk about art, and these also kind of also this kind of contemporary history, which kind of, contemporary art started after the Second World War, and there's actually really a lot of things that happened in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and etc. So of course that should be the basis, I think, of art education, because in a way we are living in this kind of tradition of that. For me personally, I think conceptual art in a way changed the whole art field a bit, and maybe that influence has lessened somehow, but it's, you still can't deny that conceptual art, and also Marcel Duchamp using ready-mades, that it has largely impacted the way most of, or not most of, but large part of contemporary art is made. And so of course also, if we talk about what's currently happening in contemporary art, we can see that it's starting, like, this repetition of forms is just getting faster and faster, and really there are cycles when certain elements just reappear, like certain materials, certain ready-made materials. So maybe in order to break out of this cycle, there should be completely different art education, or maybe you should, speculate that maybe you don't need one. But then again, I think it's better to be informed, and especially about this recent, less than a century, that largely influenced the art how we see it today. So, for example, in Latvian Art Academy, that part is, pretty dietic. There is something about conceptual art and minimalism, but there are also many other things that happened during the time. And I would say that should be something that would be included. But then, of course, ideally, there's also some more recent events and artistic movements, or movements in brackets, artistic streams, let's call them that. And there are many recent texts on art, and the field is quite broad, really broad. So of course it's also up to who is teaching it, and who's the person. And oftentimes, I guess Latvian art education system should probably need some new blood, because somehow the older generation that kind of dominates the education system, they of course still prefer rather older models that are maybe not as current, or rarely they're questioning something what's happening now.
Mm-hmm. So to sort of follow up on that, I mean, from my perspective as someone who is interested in art, I don't know how to define interested, but I go to galleries, I have friends who are artists, and I think it's interesting, but I don't know how to approach it. And I feel like that's true for also a lot of people, because I mean, mostly museum visitors aren't artists, so they don't have an artistic education, and especially this contemporary art, it's so hard to define, as you just said. How do you form this relationship as someone without an education? Do you have to approach just each work, each artist individually? which is, advice I've gotten from some people, which feels very frustrating. I'm asking how to form a relationship with it, and they just tell me, go to a gallery and look at the art. And then I look at the art, and I'm thinking, what does this mean? So how would you recommend that these people find ways to engage with it better and more fulfillingly? Is it to study art history? Is it to subscribe to art journals, or really just go to more galleries and keep looking at it until you finally feel like you understand it?
Yeah, I think maybe one part of the sort of this problem is that I think the tempos at which the general public, let's say, and at which the art scene are developing their knowledge about contemporary art is hugely different. For an average viewer, maybe actually still looking at Donald Judd, for example, it can still make you confused, like, why the hell did he do that? Like, what's the point of making colorful metallic structures?
And I think even still, for like a very large population, even early modern art, like, the urinal or sort of Rothko still seems like, oh, this isn't art, this has no meaning, it's just random.
Yeah, but I think, well, what I like about contemporary art, that it's really hugely individual. It's your own individual judgment at the end of the day. In a way that's true. You have to look at as much art as you can, and then just try to make your own judgments and try to learn how to read works. But I think also it's kind of the answer in a way is really simple to the question, like, how to understand this art. It's just look at it.
That's what I always get in the end.
Yeah, but in a way that is how I read art. Probably because, of course, also now with all the social media and the endless art blogs that are posting pictures from around the world every day, you read it really quickly, like on very general maybe parameters.
Mm-hmm.
But like, really, if you want to kind of understand the work of art, I think it's also okay sometimes to not understand it, but perhaps it's enough to pop up in your mind, let's say a year later, when you see another work and you connect those two works and you start to see some connection between them, maybe. Or you see certain artist names that appear at certain places. It's kind of course, first thing is, you look at it and you try to see something in it. And of course you can analyze the medium itself, why is it being used. You can analyze the elements used. And each medium also has really different ways how to look at it. Video art is dealing with time and with rhythm, and also playing around with history of both cinema and both video art oftentimes. And a lot of art is self-referential in a way. Artists are referencing to something made earlier or to some historic
or themselves,
of course. That's also a point, I think, where that I've reached now, that I'm starting to reference to myself because I've been doing long enough. But yeah, it's it's a lot of different elements. And then of course it's also about the communication. And so if you go to gallery, you can always ask someone to tell you something about it, or there is a press release. Maybe there's sometimes nothing. That's probably the hardest part, but maybe that's also the most exciting part, because you can really make make out anything out of it. And at the end of the day, you also have to remember that a lot of it most likely means nothing. So sometimes it means something, sometimes there is indication that it means something. Let's say there's a press release that where the text somehow connects what you see with certain ideas or historic events, or some extra context. But and then that's also one of the tools how you can understand the exhibition. Probably at the early stages you try to read more and then look after that. But over the years you can also really as if you see enough art, at some points you really start to recognize certain elements or certain forms or techniques that are repeating. Let's say some artists use oil paint in very figurative way, and that maybe leads to some kind of larger discussion about what that particular artistic stream means. But that's also there's the part of the exhibition where you see something, you don't understand anything, and there's maybe no text. But then for me it's also much broader. It's a little bit about, for example, what artists are doing outside that show, or let's say there's something in the exhibition. Maybe there's a curator who's known for some specific working method, or maybe the specific space has some history or some circle of ideas. And in a way it's really like anything else. Like if you want to understand it deeper, then probably similarly to the music, you listen to the track, maybe you save it on Spotify playlist and just listen to it without knowing anything about the band. But maybe sometimes the track is interesting enough for you so that you start to look up the musician's biography, or you start to listen to other albums, or you start to search for collaborations or explore the artist's label. So that's it's the same with art. You you see a lot of shows, and maybe they're all just songs in playlist for you in your memory playlist. But then sometimes maybe you connect also some stuff, like and then in a way it's up to
you sort
anyone.
of explored this network of influences around the art.
Well, yeah, that's one way. But if you look at art and at some point something interests you, then in a way you're maybe bound to remember that, maybe after a certain time, or think about that later on, like what did that meant after all. Or you see something, you see some other show and you think, oh yeah, this looks like that show a year ago in that place. So it's kind of also making these just extra research, like about the artist's biography, where did he show, and it's just it's in a way it's really similar to music. You just, if you're interested enough about certain things, you start to search more of that, or just go into depth of background of this particular piece of music.
I think that's a sort of good analogy, because if someone said, I'm interested to explore music, you wouldn't tell them to go research music history, like research jazz. You would just tell them to, go listen to it, see how you like it.
So of course, also similarly to music, maybe you accidentally hear a track and that track changes your life, because like you discover, like, let's say, new genre or new artist, or just like new movement or whatever. And from that on, that becomes part of your knowledge, part of your kind of reference field. Oh, sorry, for a moment I switched off mic. It becomes part of your reference field, and so through that you can really start to look for similar artists, which is, what also Spotify offers. Every artist has similar artists. So I would also, I would suggest, of course, there's a time in probably young person's life when you want to see everything, and I certainly had that. Like, I went to every museum. I have like somewhere folders of shitty quality early 2000s digital photos from every museum in Europe that I never looked again at. But of course, you look at a lot of shit, and at some point you understand, okay, this is like too much information. I have to start to filter it, and I have to start to look for things that I might actually like. And that's similar how we also go to cinema. We don't go to every movie. We choose the one that maybe has the actor that we like, or the director that we like, or anything else. So, yeah, and you can also feel, for example, this if you go to, any of the big biennials, like let's say Venice Biennial. It's so enormous, and there are of course enough crazy people who are really trying to see everything during the time they're in Venice, which is expensive time, just being there. But for me personally, in the past years, I try to see only the things that I kind of already know something about, and then hopefully there's some accidental moment. You find something new that you didn't know before, just going from those points that you want to see. So that's in I think in art also you kind of you maybe see something that you like, and then you kind of you explore that further. And in a way you also see that in, for example, Riga art scene, where people there are certain institutions or galleries or spaces, and there of course are certain people who are attached to these communities. So each community is very different. Oftentimes maybe galleries that are maybe on the same street, maybe they have completely different worldviews or different idea of what they want to do. So it's also kind of but Riga or any other Baltic country is small enough so you can actually try to see almost everything. But of course there is also some shady stuff in Old Town that no one ever sees.
Yeah, so then what I talked a little bit about with Martin, well, I think what he put really well is that even though contemporary art is very hard to define stylistically, there's a very clear sort of this industry and how it operates, and which is international, and that's more what defines contemporary art rather than what are the themes of it. So what is your sort of experience, and how would you describe this industry? What are curators, what are galleries, what are museums, and if you're an artist starting out that's trying to figure out what do I do to make money, what is it that you do?
Yeah, well, again, this industry is also huge, but of course there is certain tone of it, or certain things that are more acceptable than others. And actually, if you're a young artist, then, and if you want to be part of this art world, this global art world, or just be able to talk to people from institutions in big cities, then of course also this, what I said, this contemporary art history, theory, like all these things, or just like discussions, or critical theory, anything can really help in doing that. But of course there's also a risk that I've heard from friends who've been studying in Western Europe, that also of course these a lot of this theory, it's a certain kind of theory I mean, it's mostly leftist or feminist, so you get a lot of that, and maybe you don't get as much to hear about more experimental practices and completely different approaches that also existed in these contemporary times after the Second World War. But of course, there is this kind of like the basics that you have to know. You have to know what is camp or stuff like that, and why Susan Sontag wrote in it, for example. But okay, that's also maybe not a good example, but like that, so yeah. That is a certain world where almost everyone has had pretty similar education experiences, which is Western, or so yeah, in a way, yeah, well, never mind that, but tu pēc tam izgriezīs kaut ko.
Okay.
Es varu izgriezt arī. Yeah. So, I mean, the contemporary art, it's, of course, it's, in a way, you can say that it's maybe a hierarchy that, and maybe in each country it's a different hierarchy. In a way, yeah, maybe there's the big museums that's that in a way the top that gives you prestige as an artist if you show at a big major known museum, and then of course there are commercial galleries, but also the range is just from really few people run operation somewhere in downtown to enormous companies that are galleries, and also some art spaces maybe run on several thousand euros a year, and some have a budget of millions. So it's also that's one thing. Like if you're in a big city and you have to see all the galleries, then of course you also have to start to think about what are the galleries that you want to see. If you want to see the big names, the big spaces, and if you want to be overlooked by a bunch of security guys, then you have to go to big successful commercial gallery. Or if you want cold feet and exhibition where that happens in basement, then of course you can find also that. So yeah, and of course also this kind of, there's also in a way hierarchy in also this gallery system or any artist run spaces. There are maybe so there are connections, and there are always appearing new connections between different galleries, especially now during the pandemic, like who was I think it was David Swerner's gallery that hosted smaller galleries under their website. So in a way kind of showing this hierarchy, that there's this big gallery that hosts these small spaces so that they can survive. But also, these galleries sometimes collaborate, or there's sometimes art fairs where they all mingle. That's also another part of the art world, art fairs, which are now almost dead with the whole virtual gallery thing. But also art fair is another form of art world where you see art in really like a real life Instagram. And so yeah, I guess in a way, the usual probably ladder is that artist shows at some artist run spaces or experimental galleries. then goes to a bigger gallery, and then maybe even bigger gallery sees the artist and picks up, and then that gallery leads somehow, with the connections and everything. You get also, of course, all the connections is important if you're an artist. Like, who do you know?
Who do your children go to school with?
Well, I don't know, maybe, but I mean, it's not really, it's not really that like you have to know the person to get somewhere, but it's just really, and I agree that personal relationship is really important if you work in art. So let's say for 47 Gallery, we almost always have first met the artist, maybe even several times, until it leads to something. And also similarly to artists we are showing, let's say Latvian or Baltic artists that we are showing at the space, sometimes we follow these artists for years, and maybe only that we realize that it's the right moment to work with that artist. So it's very unlikely that I will just show someone who will send Instagram message with their portfolio or just text, I want to show at your space. So yeah, and it's also because art is, in a way, it can be very professional process, but it can also have unnecessary drama sometimes. So of course everyone also wants to work with sane people, or at least I do. So that's also part of the reason why first I want to meet the artist and talk with the artist and have a drink with. But yeah, and then this kind of system. There's also curators in it. I mean, I don't know. It could be drawn as Maslow's pyramid maybe, but on the other hand, it's still quite random. And
so it's not like a company where you have workers, managers, and then CEOs.
I mean, you can, yeah, it's not that, yeah. You're more, there are individual entities. There's, like galleries, institutions, artists, curators. And it's, in a way, there is some element of randomness or accidental nature, or just luck, or the opposite of luck. It's you can meet someone and maybe that leads to exhibition somewhere where you never thought you would have an exhibition. And in a way, 47 Gallery has allowed us to maybe have even more of that kind of mobility and broader, range of people we know or people who knows us. And in a way, it's already kind of like a sort of a brand, if I have to call it like that. And these certain connections, sometimes it's just one-time friendly chit-chat. Sometimes you find someone who you're really interested in, and or who's really maybe interested in what I do or Marta does. And so in a way, I would say it's really, about these personal connections, personal interactions with other people in the art field, and or just also large part self-initiative, because for you to be seen, you have to show something somehow. So I also throughout my career as an artist, I have done quite a lot of off-space shows in Riga, because oftentimes I didn't got invited to, let's say, the few Latvian Riga commercial galleries, or the very few institutions that have spaces, or etc. So But you can see it as that, as a calculation that you make an exhibition to have more exposure. But for me, it has oftentimes been also just adventure to just make a show off space without any gallery or institution support, just on your own, one person operation. You make everything, etc. But then that can also lead to different things. Maybe someone sees it and thinks, oh, I have a show coming up and maybe this artist would fit. And so this kind of hierarchy, of course, is you are an artist at first, and then probably with the help of curator or some cultural agent, or perhaps a gallerist. Some students who graduate, they get picked up by galleries immediately, so they don't even have a curator first, they have a gallerist who kind of starts to move the things, get more connections, get more opportunities. Maybe sometimes they have a gallerist who doesn't do that. It's also possible. But it's
so in this case, a gallerist is sort of almost like an agent for actors, essentially.
I mean, yeah. Gallerist is an agent who, gallerist is interested that the artist is more known, that the name is, has bigger resonance. They can easier sell their work and, get profit. But, that's kind of the kind of normal system of big developed city. I think in Baltic states, all the cities are small enough. Of course, there's still also some hierarchy, or if you want to pursue certain artistic career, you do certain things in art. Of course, there won't be like all of the galleries or all of the institutions will say yes. There's also, as I said, within even these smaller cities, there are still a lot of communities. But in Latvia, it's very rare that you get a gallerist that represents you and just kind of resonates you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, local gallerist. There are, of course, few, but it's not a big scene, not a big market here. But yeah, and there are different players that have their range of artists that I like, that I want to promote, and then that can maybe lead to a museum show, or maybe you get nominated to represent Latvia in Venice Biennial, or maybe get invited to some international event. But I mean, if you really just focus on local scene, of course there is some things to do, but sometimes maybe there's there are big periods where nothing happens for you. So I think pretty early enough I understood that it's also important to not just be kind of trying to do something in local scene, but also to look outside Latvian borders and to get little insights in certain cities of some small scenes.
So it feels like there's essentially two vectors in which you must grow in contemporary art field. There's the national one, and then there's the international one.
Yeah, they can overlap. You can be an international artist that is also maybe liked locally. I mean, yeah, there are some artists who are represented by great galleries in the big cities of world, and okay, maybe they are not so visible in Latvian context, but they're still respected artists who can get museum shows or something like that. But you can also be, like younger experimental artist who shows at, experimental spaces or institutions, art centers around the world, and also still do the same in Latvia. And there are also a lot of artists who do that. But yeah, for maybe more commercially oriented artists, I think they're often really even rather staying outside of the local scene in a way. But it's also different for every artist.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the best thing is really to kind of work in both directions. That you're not a stranger in your own city, but that you also have a kind of broader locations available for you to explore. Of course, now with limited traveling, it's kind of maybe more harder for these kind of physical based projects, because that's also another aspect of what I do. It's mostly physical, and I mostly want people to experience it in person. Even if I do a painting exhibition with white walls and nothing else, I still want people to be present with, in the space. So in a way, maybe currently that part of art world is maybe suffering a bit. That these connections. I'm also not really the person who kind of makes a lot of connections online. So I feel more isolated and more in our own community. But also that led to a decision for 47 Gallery that for now we try to focus on mostly local artists or Latvian artists.
Mm-hmm. So you both have experience running 427, which is sort of the smaller, really artist-run gallery, and then also being the ex-creative director of Kim, the sort of bigger contemporary art center. And so how has your experience been different in those two positions? Because, I mean, one of them is really sort of, all in your control and with your co-owner, and in Kim, you're more involved in maybe these politics of the industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said in the beginning, I think my main occupation is still artist. So artist run space kind of, it's a small operation, but even with that, I'm sometimes struggling. In the past, there have been times where we haven't gotten the financing from foundation, or we have had other problems, or sometimes exhibitions, I don't know, maybe there's sometimes the exhibition opens an hour after it's supposed to open, or something like that. But at the same time, it's still pretty organized. But with Kim, well, I should have known that it was just a mistake at the very beginning. But yeah, it's working in team, it's working in office. Those are two completely alien things to me. I have never worked in office or in bigger teams, or maybe I have worked in bigger teams, but I've been like the kind of side player of some bigger projects. And so in this case, I was kind of in charge of this whole program, but it was. I just quickly realized that it's just too much for me, and that I also really hate going to office, and it was also emotionally kind of draining because I was going through a lot of communication. I'm not the best replier to emails or etc. So
that seems to be the case with a lot of artists.
Yeah, I'm really I have sometimes problems sending a mail. I keep it as unread for a week, and then send it out maybe when I have a good period of of emotional situation. But anyway, yeah, it was kind of like it was just draining to have this overwhelming communication. I was also traveling like constantly, and this position that came, it's, you know, I could go in details about all the different things that's maybe too much for me, but essentially it was, yeah, just really overwhelming, and I quickly realized that also, well, it's yeah, you have to do certain compromises maybe sometimes, or work on things that you never thought you would work on, like, you know, more like publicity based things and stuff like that. And so yeah, I very quickly understood that it's just not for me.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, I think in one way, if you look at it, it's in a way it's the same. We do exhibitions, we have spaces that, you know, somehow white cubish spaces. We prefer physical exhibitions to virtual, and etc. But our space is 10 times smaller than Kim's space, and so from the size of the space, you know, you have to fill it with a lot more content in a way. There are also certain requirements for Kim to meet so that they get funding from the state, which is like certain amount of exhibitions a year. So with 47, I don't have that. I can make 3 exhibitions. Of course, it never happened so far, but you know, I can make few exhibitions, or I can make 10. But with Kim, let's say, you know, there's certain number of exhibitions that you have to do. So that's already like a, you know, pressure. And the number, you know, it's kind of a big number if you do it all alone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. And even in a small team, it's kind of a big number, and the whole the whole operation just becomes bigger because there are more people involved and etc. And that for me is just, yeah, that's the part that I don't like, to deal with people and to, you know, have different crazy problems. You know, with 47 I can kind of control. If it gets too much, I can, you know, make a small few months pause and just do nothing.
And so for these bigger galleries, who do you feel like is, I guess, the target audience wouldn't be the right term, but who is the one that they focus on the most for their well-being? You know, is it the audience, is it collectors, or is it the artists themselves? What is sort of their focus?
Well, you know, everyone says that artist is the first, but rarely it is. In institutions or museums, rarely it is. But I mean, probably everyone is sort of driven by parts of everything. I think any institution wants, of course, audience, and of course you get funding based on how much audience you get. So that's also, in a way, there's like, when I was there at Kim, there was also this kind of education program for kids or for senior citizens and etc. And that's kind of great that, you know, there are some kids coming and they get used to, you know, art. And in a way, I think kids understand art probably better than most people. And so yeah, in a way, that's audience. So, you know, they try to come up with something. But, you know, for also for like institutions like Kim, it's, I think, I'm not sure, but I think it's one of the very few, if not the only, Baltic institution that has kind of board of members, and that also has this kind of patronage system, that they have patrons. So that also kind of changes a bit how it's run, or how it's what kind of thing they want to show, or what kind of results they want to get. Of course, they also want acknowledgement from these patrons or the members of board. And but yeah, for also another thing that also is, I guess, important for certain institutions in Baltic states, or also I could also say the same thing for my gallery, but the thing that is, of course, also kind of maybe driving you, or maybe just you can see it as a certain accomplishment, is also, the variety of visitors that you get. That if you maybe get certain curators or certain members of institutions or whatever, there are also, again, not currently, but there used to be certain institutions or galleries or organizations or universities or whatever traveling around certain parts of Europe, and oftentimes they would end up in Baltics or in Latvia. And then it's also have always been like kind of a good sign that 47, let's say, is being recommended to people as a place to see. So that's also in a way kind of for me a small accomplishment, that people outside Latvia know 47, and that they know if you ever come to Riga, then you have to see it.
But so for 427 itself, who do you feel like you're doing it for? Is it, just for yourself as a thing you're doing because you like doing it? Or do you feel like, maybe you're doing this to give opportunities to local artists or international artists? Or is it, for the local scene, community visitors? Who do you have in mind when you're working on it?
I think it actually started as a kind of with wanting to contribute to local scene, because as many young people, I got involved in like the party scene and the cultural scene of Riga, and me and some other friends kept talking more and more often that there aren't artist-run spaces in Riga, or there aren't small galleries that maybe show art that's a bit more cool than what we usually saw in Riga. I mean, yeah, I'm even not scared from this word cool, because at the time it really kind of felt that what do you see in Riga? It's not particularly cool stuff. Occasionally you get something interesting, or maybe occasionally you get something cool. But that was also, kind of that we wanted to contribute to local art scene, so that there's a new space or another space that offers something different from the other organizations in Riga. But and then over the time, of course, it has, of course, attracted some people around our gallery. There are people who come to openings frequently, and people who just help the gallery, or artists who show at the gallery. So it's kind of in a way I like building this sense of community, which is creating maybe more strongly now. It's maybe not defined, but I see that there are a couple of other artist-run entities in Riga that are also in a way doing something in the same direction, and somehow thinking about art in similar ways. It's that was also kind of the thing, and then at some point, of course, we started to get more and more visitors, and that's also always pleasant that people come to see the shows, and we are not open that often, and so when we have visitors, it's always great.
Yeah, I think there's a very similar thing also with EKKM, is that when you have this smaller artist-run gallery, you sort of have this more impersonal community growing, with the visitors and the people that exhibit there. They sort of know each other, and then you also have opening parties or parties even not related to an exhibition, musicians performing, which is totally something you don't ever see, like in Pompidou Center in France. Like you wouldn't have, French DJs playing there and making raves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's the great part about kind of being more flexible. I mean, big serious institutions could also do that, and they sometimes try to do that. But sometimes when they try to do that, that doesn't look very cool. So of course, it's also the attitude that we have. I think we really love our artists, and we try to be generous to the visitors, and yeah, that's kind of the thing that makes it still interesting for me and worthwhile. I keep meeting new people, or keep seeing new amazing exhibitions that are happening at the space I run, and that's also the kind of the artists that we work with. It's an important part, because I'm always really excited about the stuff that's going on. There have been maybe few occasions when I'm kind of disappointed, but of course I will never tell which occasions those were. But mostly I'm just over the moon about everything that artists do at our space. And it's also exciting to see different practices, to talk with different artists, to see how they work, to see different practices. I said that already, but I mean, to just like different approaches, how they build a show, how they talk about it, also over the time. And that's also the thing, like as a gallery, maybe it looks cooler if you are showing consistently similar aesthetically thing, and it's always the same few paragraph text briefly explaining the context of the works. But for me, it was always interesting to experiment with this format. So sometimes an exhibition have heavily theoretical text, but sometimes it has
have fun.
Yeah, so sometimes it just there's Pushkin's poem, or silly drawing, or 5-page dialogue about eggs. So it's been really different. And also the works, I guess you can see some similarities between certain artists that we show, but also over the time it's been really broad, even within kind of our narrow corner of the contemporary art that we have taken. It's still, I think, very broad. So it's been really different things. Of course, mostly it's been so-called traditional mediums that don't require electricity, but we have also had videos and augmented reality works and etc.
So I think one thing that's sort of impressive, if I can say so, about EKKM is that it's been able to take this sort of artist-run philosophy and structure and be able, to grow beyond what most sort of artist-run galleries can, which, usually get stuck at this level where you have your local community, but it's hard to grow beyond that. And what do you feel like is the limiting factor, and what would be a way to help these institutions? Is it that there's just not enough people who are ready to put in a lot of the times essentially unpaid work to be able to make that happen? Does it need more support from the government, from sort of cultural grants, or is it the audience who has to engage more to help these spaces grow?
It could be probably a little bit of everything, but I think actually the team is very important. So maybe, and I'm almost sure that EKKM has great team. That's, and especially if it's artist run, there's less hierarchy in the relationship between different members of the organization. So I think it's one key is that you have a team, especially if it's a larger operation, and you have a team that you can trust, or you work with, or you just you work with curators you can trust, and the curators can trust you. That's also important. I think it's also important, how you manage the exhibitions, because if you fuck up exhibition, let's say you break artists' work when you send them back, or you lose it, or you don't give it back, or maybe there's some problems installing, or maybe there's any kind of weird situations that can also play on the reputation for an institution among other artists, because artists talk, and through artists I know about different random galleries or spaces or institutions at different locations that have fucked up at some point. So that's kind of also important, that and that's why our artist run thing maybe is somehow better, because I think artists they have more empathy for other artists. You can sometimes hear curators jokingly saying that artists are just the working bees and we are the queen bees. So that can also be maybe certain institution just has this hierarchy that artist is not the most important, or what artist does is not the focus of exhibition or whatever.
It's people come here to read the booklet, not look at the art.
Yeah, I mean, it's really different things, I think.
But so, say for something like Latvia, what do you feel like would be something that would have to happen for, more of these sort of places to appear and really find success?
I mean, some new places are appearing, but I mean, in a way, Kim, I think now this year they celebrate 12 years. And over the time, actually, they have really helped to kind of promote Latvian name outside of borders, or just, by having also interesting exhibitions and etc., or interesting projects outside. So in a way, that's happening. But for Latvian institutions, I guess... I don't know. It's it's just really how you run things, how you do things, how you communicate, and everything that. It
kind of feels like it's like a potion you're mixing. You don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes every ingredient just fits right, and
Yeah, exactly.
It
That's
blows
also up. Like if you make theater play or you shoot a movie, there's someone in the team who screws up, and the whole movie is fucked. Or if someone screws up or someone doesn't care about the job, then the others start to wobble and think about what they're actually doing there. I've been in several like filming and theater situations, so I can also draw from that experience. Sometimes it just feels right, the movie is going great and everything's is going great, and sometimes it's just there's that element is maybe that person is maybe not doing their job properly, or that person is maybe fucked up something, and it's a teamwork. And the same is with institutions, galleries, everything. It's a teamwork, and that's the key for just running a successful operation. And then of course you have to do all the extra work. You have to get some new connections and promote yourself in a way, and etc. But yeah, for artist-run thing or like a small operation like ours, it's we're very flexible. Like in October 2020, we participated in Salon de Normandie by the Finnish collective. Well, it's Parisian collective, The Community, and I did sort of this like alternative take on art fair, and I did it in an old beautiful hotel right in the heart of Paris, and yeah, we got invited there a month before. Maybe larger institution wouldn't be able to organize that fast, but we quickly organized, and we had enough so to say connections or arms long enough to organize something during this Salon de Normandie. So that's also kind of, I think, the kind of the privilege of artist-run spaces, that you can take risks, you can do something really last moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
So I think that's also a way to say that you don't need to grow big to be successful. That you can run a small operation, and that's enough if it's satisfies the needs in that scene.
Yeah.
Or
actually I enjoy having a small space because it's just easier. Of course, larger space you can show larger works, but larger works require more money. And also I don't know about Estonia, but Latvia, of course, there is State Culture Capital Foundation that supports artists and institutions and artist-run spaces like ours, or sometimes even commercial galleries. And the funding, in a way, it's great. It's in a way, it's very trusting. If you get support, you have full control over your process. Mostly, you can do whatever. Even though it's under Culture Ministry, which is for a long time now run by Nationalist Party.
Maybe you have any closing things to say, whatever the audience could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you feel that something is missing in the city you live in, it's a good reason to start doing something. And that's how 427 started, because we just felt that something is missing. So I would encourage everyone to really, take up some self-initiatives if they're starting. And the same goes for viewing art. To go to the art gallery is already amazing. That you are, rather than going to bar, you decide that you will go to an art gallery. Maybe
sometimes the art gallery is pretty much a bar.
Yeah, also, why not? That's also a great thing. I love art galleries that are also somehow bars. But yeah. I think that's the thing. Like if you feel like you don't see enough good art, then maybe there is actually some good art happening in your city. Sometimes we don't know. There have been few occasions when I've seen some very weird and amazing performances, because they happened as a part of some very old school dancing festivals or theater festivals, and sometimes there's something unique in those things. But also, of course, go to the spaces that you like, and if you like what the space did once, maybe go there again, and give it at least 3 tries before you decide if you want to go there. But I mean, also, every institution, every gallery, they change over the time. Also, 427 is very different now than from what it was for the first years. But yeah, and what I said, that like if you see that something is missing, you can fill the gaps. You can do the thing that you feel is missing, or if you feel that something is missing in contemporary art, then it's the right motivation to do something. Because what kind of scares me at this period of overly saturated imagery every day on our screens is that things start to look really the same. And somehow the artists, in a way they think that also, kind of everyone assumes that this is what the art world wants, this sort of thing. But I think more interesting than that is not to think about something that already exists and how to create something like that and better, but to maybe think about something that doesn't exist at all or hasn't existed in art field for some years, or of course these kind of very genius eureka moments are super rare. You rarely come up with something unique. Most likely it has been done before. That's also something you have to live with. But I think just be open to everything. Keep in mind that everything is meaningless, and everything you have done and will do has probably been done before.
Well, thank you, and thank you for listening.
And if that doesn't give you inspiration to do something, then maybe don't.